Hello everyone, a very good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the first ever Disrupted live event brought to you by Euronews in partnership with Accenture. My name is Damon Embling. I'm a journalist with Euronews and I'm going to be hosting and moderating this event, this debate over the next 60 minutes or so. So thank you very much indeed for being with us, for us having your company this afternoon. So what are we going to be discussing? Well, the name of this event is Disrupted, and I think that's the perfect word, isn't it, to describe the way that work has changed over the past year or so since the pandemic hit Europe and the rest of the world. Many of us are now working from home offices, just like me today, and many offices, the traditional ones, have been left deserted, and also all the infrastructures that normally run around them. But are the changes that we've seen over the past year in the ways of working going to be a short-term thing as we ease ourselves out of the pandemic? Are things going to go back to normal afterwards? Or are there going to be some very much long-term changes coming out of this? Are we looking at a future of hybrid working methods? What are the implications for all of this in terms of businesses and organizations, in terms of how they run? And what are the implications for things like policy, HR policy, productivity, equality, diversity? And also another important question, what does it all mean for the health and well-being of individuals, those workers that are employed by companies that are now having to change their daily routines as they go to work in a very different way? So the big question we're asking this afternoon is, will work ever be the same again? We'd love you to join this Disrupted live event debate as well. So if you have any questions for the panelists that I'm just about to introduce, please do leave those in the comments section just below the video screen where you're watching, and we'll get those questions, as many of them as we can, to our panelists a bit later on. Thanks again for joining us. So without further ado, let's introduce our great lineup of guests. We have 4 guests for this Disrupted live event this afternoon. First of all, let's go over to Heidelberg in Germany, where Tim Good is waiting for us. He's the Managing Director of Strategy and Consulting at Accenture. Hello to you, Tim.
Good afternoon, Damon. Great to be with you.
Thanks very much indeed. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on all of this a bit later on. Dr. Katia Vione is a psychology lecturer at the University of Derby, and she joins us from Derby in the UK, just north from where I am here in Oxford in the UK. Hello to you, Katia.
Hi, Damon. Good afternoon.
Nice to see you there. Ben Butters is the CEO of Eurochambers, or Eurochambre, in Brussels in Belgium, just across the English Channel. Hi to you, Ben.
Hello, Damon. Thanks for having me.
Nice to see you there. And last but not least, I'm going to have a bit of a difficulty pronouncing his name, but certainly Casper. He's the CEO of GAP's tech company in Helsinki in Finland. Help me out here, Casper.
Sure thing, Damon. So it's Kasper Pöyry, very Finnish name. So yeah, no problems with that. Glad to be here. Good afternoon to everybody.
Fantastic. And thank you very much indeed for joining us from Helsinki. So will work ever be the same again? Ben Butters, CEO of Eurochambers, let's go over to you first of all. I think before we look forward, let's look back a little bit. The past year has been quite a shock, hasn't it, in terms of the way that businesses now have to run, in terms of how workers are working. And I guess this has really been a shock for small and large businesses as well. Ben, just unmute yourself, please, and then we can hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, it certainly has been a shock. There are some businesses which were already using remote processes within their companies before the pandemic struck, but for the majority that wasn't the case. And of course, they've had to adapt very quickly within a matter of days in some cases. So that really was a tough adaptation process. And I don't think you can make a very simple large business, easy, small business, tricky assumption there, because some of the larger businesses have found it quite difficult, and some of the smaller, nimble businesses have found it actually quite easy to adapt. But for all of them, it's been a bit of a shock to the system for sure.
And how easy has it been for an organisation like yours? You're based in Brussels, but you have members all over the place, and you're quite a large organisation in terms of the number of people you represent. What's the ways of working been like for you and your colleagues over the past year?
It's had pros and cons. I think, like many organizations, in some respects, it's helped us to communicate with our members scattered around Europe, and it's allowed us or encouraged us to adopt new approaches to having those contacts with members who are thousands of kilometers away. But we had to adapt. We had to change our statutes in some respects, because physical meetings of our General Assembly, for example, were not possible during 2020 and remain impossible during 2021. And I think that's an issue for a lot of associations and organizations. And of course, for the staff, it's been very odd from effectively being together as a team of 35, 40 people in our offices in Brussels. We again are scattered around Europe, working via digital platforms, which is not easy in some respects, but we've managed, and the staff have coped brilliantly.
Okay, Ben at Eurochambers, thank you very much indeed for now. Let's go over to Tim Good, Managing Director, Strategy and Consulting at Accenture. Tim, we heard there that how small and large businesses have been adapting over the past year. In general, do you think it's been a real headache for businesses adapting or an opportunity?
Honestly speaking, I think it's been a little bit of both. I'm an optimist by nature, so I tend to come in on the optimistic side of this. And if I can break that out slightly, why I think like that, I think, first of all, this has been a great leveler. I mean, we've talked for quite a long time about the democratization of work, and actually a number of the things that we've seen happen and have been accelerated through the COVID pandemic were actually already starting to happen anyway. There are some differences clearly between what I would call a more production type workforce that has to be physically connected versus a white collar workforce, or what we traditionally call a white collar workforce, that can work remotely. But actually, I think, what this has done is it's suddenly leveled the playing field literally overnight. And certainly with my clients and with the chief people officers, the chief HR officers that I interact with, I think there was really a sort of 2-step or 3-step process that people went through. One, in the immediate aftermath, how do I care for the immediate safety of my people? How do I ensure that my workforce is safe? And actually, universally, that's what we saw happen across industries overnight. Secondly, once that had been taken care of, how do I actually now start to pick the pieces back together? And how do I make good probably 5 years of technology work in 5 days in order that I can get my organization up and running again? And now fast forward to today, where actually we start to look at, okay, what does this mean now going forward? What have we learned, and how are we going to continue to operate based on what we've learned?
Tim from Accenture, thank you very much indeed for that. And we're going to pick up on that point of how the pandemic has accelerated things that were already happening before the pandemic in just a few moments. But first of all, I want to go to Dr. Katia Vione, who's a psychology lecturer here in the UK, where I am. She's at the University of Derby. Katia, businesses have had to adapt. They've had to change. It's been easier for some, more difficult for others. But let's not forget that actually human beings are at the center of all of this as well. The workers, right? It's been quite a year for just workers having to change as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, for sure. So what we know in terms of research in this area is that when workers are part of the transformation of a company that is moving from a traditional way of working to these new ways of working, we know that there are benefits when there is this participation, but in the pandemic, there wasn't that possibility, and that's just one of the factors. Working from home, there were many other factors in play at this time that could have and definitely have affected people's mental health. So there were many things to juggle at the same time, and I think it's too early stages for us to understand exactly what is the impact. And I'm not sure if we will ever be able to say, is it just because we are working remotely, or were there other elements as well that affected everyone? But obviously we can understand a little bit more in terms of how work is going to be, and try to anticipate some of the issues for mental health.
And Katia, we're going to speak in a few minutes about the responsibilities of companies and organizations in terms of what they need to do to look out for their employees in terms of health and well-being. That's going to be something that we're discussing a bit later on. And of course, the impact on real people has been that a lot of people have also lost their jobs over the past year, remember, and the impact that that's had on people as well. But let's look forward a bit now. We've reflected on what's happened already, and clearly there's been a lot of change within business in terms of the ways of working that have already come in. We're going to look forward now in terms of what this does mean for the future. And I think a good starting point is to go to Kasper, the CEO of Gap's tech company in Helsinki in Finland. Kasper, you must have been sitting back over the past year and looking at all of this and thinking, we've already been doing this.
Yeah, you could say so, but there's been so many kind of moving parts and things at play, so it's never that black and white. But indeed, we've had a very flexible working policy for quite a number of years already. So basically, it doesn't matter where you work from. Is it home? Is it a cafe? Is it whatever place or the office. So you kind of choose what works for you, and everything is sort of facilitated around it. So all of our internal meetings are you can join via remote, and you will not be missing a huge chunk of the content because it's not arranged. So, which is very common in today's business world.
And really, you've been at the heart of kind of a very forward-thinking city in terms of Helsinki. There's a lot of tech startups there, but the city itself has been embracing these new ways of working, remote working as well, for quite a few years now, haven't they?
Yeah, there's a ton of co-working spaces and cafes and places where you can go to work if you're not going to the office, and that might shorten your commute quite a lot. You might be traveling into a different city, you might be based someplace else, you need a quiet spot for a meeting or working for an hour or two. So it's good to see that the kind of world evolves around us and makes this possible. So I think in Finland, it's quite a lot to do with the mentality, the kind of trust that is, especially in high-tech industries.
Yeah, this mentality and trust. Ben Butters, let's go back to your Euro Chambers in Brussels. We said earlier on, didn't we? I think you said that some of this was things that were already happening, and the pandemic has accelerated the changes. But there was this element, wasn't there? I think it's fair to say, amongst some businesses, of mistrust. They thought that these new ways of working might be something they do in the future, but they didn't actually trust in them enough to allow everybody to do them as much as they wanted to, because they did worry about people's performance and productivity, right?
I think you're quite right there, Damon. That was an issue. It's not very rational now that we have gone through the last year or so and seen how things can work remotely, and it does seem a bit simplistic to assume that just because somebody comes to the office, they are more productive than working from another location. So that notion seems quite dated now, and that's become dated very quickly, even among businesses that held on to that very firmly before the pandemic broke out. I think everybody has had to adapt, and I think that the way that the staff of businesses have responded to these challenges demonstrates that it really needn't impact on productivity, and the work ethic. It can be just as strong from any location as it can be from the office, and in some cases even stronger. And some policymakers are in fact concerned that employees are working harder during this situation than they would be in the office, and there is a blurring of lines between private and work balance. So we need to be conscious of that as employers and work with policymakers to ensure that division is retained.
Yeah, indeed, and the impact that has on health and well-being and motivation and all those sorts of things. Tim, let's go back to you at Accenture. Obviously, through the work that you do through your company, when people were looking at these ways of working previously, before the pandemic, these skeptics, as I suppose, what kind of skeptics were you coming across, and why don't you think that other countries like Finland have been embracing this for a lot longer? Why is it only taking this now to really be the catalyst?
I think one thing was just simply the fact that there was no catalyst. So, it's like anything in life. When there is a catalyst, when there's a seismic event that happens, even something like COVID-19 with all of the tragic side of it, it was nevertheless a catalyst, and that actually has caused some of that change to happen. I think some of the other problems that we've got are more systemic. So if you actually look at a lot of business today, sadly, it's still very much focused on input-based type traditional management as opposed to output-based leadership. And I think the secret here going forwards, or there's no secret about it, but actually the potential here going forwards, and there's a link to this in terms of well-being and health, which we can come on to, I'm sure, later on, is that when you actually start to think in terms of output, and actually when you broaden the canvas and you say, you know what, I don't mind where you speak to me from, quite frankly, providing we have an enriched conversation, providing we move our agenda forward, it can be in a field, frankly, or it can be behind a desk, then actually you just get to a completely different place. And I think what's happened in the pandemic on its best day is that's where we've moved to. But this is going to take a long time to actually work through, and it's going to take an enormous amount of coaching to help managers move to being leaders.
Okay, Tim from Accenture, thank you very much indeed for now. If you're just joining us, our audience, welcome along. Thanks for joining us on this live virtual event, the first ever disrupted live event. My name is Damon Embling. I'm a journalist with Euronews, and I'm moderating this event. Will the work ever be the same again? That's the question we're asking this afternoon. We're debating, discussing, and looking forward to the future ways of working. So if you have any questions for any of the great panelists that you can see on the screen there, do leave them in the comment section below the video where you're watching, and we'll get those to our panelists a bit later on. Katia Vione, psychology lecturer at University of Derby. Let's go back to you in the UK. Just before the pandemic hit, I think it was in the sort of latter part of 2019, you actually started some research and study, didn't you, into new ways of working. You didn't know, obviously, the pandemic was coming, so it turned out to be quite timely. What's your research been looking at, and what does it kind of tell us now in terms of looking forward?
Yes, so towards the end of 2019, one of my colleagues, Dr. Yasu Kotera, and I, we started working on a systematic review to look at the psychological impacts of new ways of working. At that time, we really didn't know what was going to happen. By the time that we finished the review process and were about to publish, the pandemic was already there, and we did include that we would have to think about it even more now that pandemic had forced everyone to work from home remotely. New ways of working is actually, it goes beyond that, because it gives you not just time, space flexibility in terms of workers being able to do their job from any other places that not necessarily an office, but it also gives people time flexibility. So there is that relationship of trust that the company will trust their employees to do their job, and then there is enough clarity about what needs to be done and by when. So there's this trust that the work will happen, and the company will provide all the processes and technology for that to happen smoothly in a way that people don't actually have to be in that particular space. So we did a review of the studies that were available at that time. There weren't many, really. So our review actually only considered 7 studies. 6 were in the Netherlands, 1 was in Slovakia. And I've been kind of having a look, and I think we will have to do another review with COVID in mind, probably in the near future. And there are a few studies that are now looking at it. But as I said before, there are so many elements that I don't think we will ever be able to say this is because the work has changed or this is because the world has changed. So it will be complicated, but obviously we will have to look from a work perspective how that has been impacted people, and to what extent is actually people's perception. Is it just the work arrangements, or are there any other elements that need to be taken in consideration? So my research and Dr. Kotera's research has been in workers' mental health in general. I was looking before at postgraduate researchers' mental health, and Dr. Kotera was looking at social care workers, construction workers, so like different groups. And yeah, our collaboration is ongoing, and now we will update with COVID in mind.
Yeah, you've got lots more research ahead by the sounds of it. And we're going to talk about mental health in a few moments with you, Katia, so don't go anywhere. Kasper, let's go back to you, CEO of GAP's tech company in Helsinki in Finland. We were talking about the skeptics, weren't we? We were talking about how some people have probably been convinced now. They've had to be convinced because they've had to adapt and they've had to change. You talked about the ethos and the sort of location-free working that you've been embracing for some time now. It works for you, but has it also been a bit challenging?
Yeah, it's been challenging as well. So I can't say that we're a poster child and everything is perfect in our world. So it has taken a lot of thought, and there's some trial and error. Sometimes there's a good thought that there's no need to have any distrust that whether somebody would be working remotely or anything like that. Sometimes connections might be bad, and it has forced, I think Tim had the good point, it has forced us to think a lot about the output, the actual results of the work, rather than time spent doing it. So it's taken a lot of work to getting it to this point.
So how does it work then? So you don't dictate the hours that people work, like 9 to 5 every day. You just say, like, you need to get this project done over this week and make sure you get it done. And is that how it works? How does it work simply?
So we're even by law, we need to track our people's working hours, and in our world, there's a high emphasis on not working people to the ground, meaning that the end result of a project is everything. So no matter how many hours it takes, because that's not the right thing to do for people. And now in these days, as Katja said, there's a lot of blurring between the private life and working life, because you're working quite often from home. So it's pretty hard task for a lot of people to try to find that balance. And we have, for us, it means that you can have, if it works for you, that you do certain part of your active day in the morning, then you might do something in between. If you have a place to go, or in the afternoon you need to pick up your kid from daycare, then you can continue afterwards, obviously within the frame of your working day and week, so things would go in an optimal way.
But Casper, some people would say, well, you run a tech company, a software company. It's quite easy for you to have location-free working, remote working. It's something you've been done for a long time. But actually, for other companies, it might not be so easy, really, in terms of their business, right?
Yeah, that's true. It doesn't work for everybody. There's a lot of jobs in this world what you just absolutely cannot do remotely. But I'd say that's an excuse that's been used in a lot of cases where it doesn't really apply. So I think the pandemic has been a good sort of a litmus test for what kind of jobs you can really do remotely. So a lot of those excuses will run out afterwards, whether you could have your few days of remote work each week and save 4 hours, 5 hours of your commute time.
Okay, Casper in Helsinki, thank you very much indeed for now. Let's go back to Ben at Eurochambers in Brussels. We've been hearing there from Casper about how it's worked for him in his software company, his tech company. But I guess this isn't one size fits all. How do you see the future? Do you think what we're seeing now during the pandemic is here to stay in the long term? Or do you think it's going to be a mixture, a hybrid way of work going forward?
Yeah, I think that's what we're probably going to move towards, a hybrid solution. There's data to suggest that people need interaction, physical interaction. They need, that water cooler moments where they just chat with colleagues, interact with colleagues. That makes them happier. It makes them more productive. It makes them more innovative. It makes them more creative. That can, to an extent, be achieved via a screen, but nonetheless, I think there is both a social and an economic advantage to some closer connection and an office environment where possible. So I think a hybrid solution is the most likely outcome, but that isn't without challenges. It needs to be thought through from everybody's perspective. It's difficult in some respects for the employer. It's difficult in some respects for the employees, and it has policy implications as well. So I don't think we can just assume that hybrid is the panacea to all of our solutions. We need to think things through carefully together.
Okay, then. Tim Good at Accenture, what's your take on this, looking to the future? Do you think it's going to be a hybrid way of work, or do you think it's just going to depend on the country, the company, the circumstances, the people?
My personal view, again, is that it's going to be a hybrid way of work. It will have some nuance depending on the industry, depending on, again, the nature of the work that's being conducted. There are certain things, again, in the production workforce, that have a physicality to them. If you're operating machinery, if you're operating a plant, and even if that's highly digitized, you still need to have people that are on site to do some of that work. And then at the other extreme, you've obviously got sort of your tech-based organizations that arguably can do this stuff completely remotely. I think what's been quite interesting is if you actually look at what's happened over the course of the pandemic, there was that trend round about, I think it was sort of late summer, early summertime, when a number of the high-tech companies quite publicly and on the record went out there and said, we're going to completely have remote working from now on. We've proven that this can work. You fast forward to today, and a number of them have actually backtracked on that. And they're actually starting to say, the best of both worlds is probably what we want to get to. And if I can give you two examples of why I think that's important, I think, first of all, we as humans do crave that physical contact. And for things like innovation, to be together, to be in a room, to have that social contact before, in breaks, potentially afterwards, and in some non-work activity even, is going to be important. And that is just a fundamental of human nature that's going to exist. I think the other thing is, if you actually look at the workforce, if I think of myself personally, I'm in quite a luxurious position here. I have a relatively decent sized house. I have a big family around me, and I have company. There's always something going on. But if I look at some of my team, and especially some people that are fairly new entrants into the workforce, they've had to live through this in small apartments. They perhaps had to have a discussion every morning with their flatmate as to who works in the bedroom, who works in the kitchen. Maybe in some cases, they didn't even have a desk. So they want to come back and they want to have that social contact again. So I think it is going to be that hybrid as we move forwards.
And others trying to push their cat and their puppies off their laps and all sorts of different things. Yeah, it's been a challenge depending on your circumstances. Katia Vione, at the University of Derby, psychology lecturer, joining us today. I think Tim has hit the nail on the head there, really, hasn't he? That this pandemic and the new ways of working have affected different people in different ways, depending on your circumstances, right?
Yeah, for sure. What we know from the literature is that people who have been directly affected by the pandemic, which means almost everyone, and that is in terms of people who had to be in a lockdown or forced to self-isolate, these have been hit the hardest in terms of their mental health outcomes. So we see increased levels of stress, increased levels of anxiety and depression. So that has been reported throughout the last year in the literature, and that's for several countries. So yes, and then there's the fact, I'm very much in agreement with Tim that I think what's going to happen will vary in terms of the industry and job roles, but we also need to take in consideration individual differences, not just in terms of life circumstances, whether people have that opportunity for social interaction, but there are so many other psychological factors, such as people's personality. Some people might actually prefer remote working. Some people might prefer going back to the office if they have that sort of opportunity and flexibility. And I think where companies can allow this flexibility and can allow the negotiations in terms of how work is going to look like for each person, I think that's going to be very helpful, especially if we think that everyone has been affected to some extent, and the extent of the impact into people's mental health, we're still not entirely sure. We know it's happening. So I think giving people this flexibility and time to adjust according to their, some extent, personal needs, I think that would be very helpful, actually.
Okay, Katia, thank you very much indeed for that. While I've got you here, I've got a question from a member of our audience that sent this in via the Euronews Instagram platform. We were talking earlier about the blurred lines now between work life and home life. Beatrice is asking on Instagram, how could the work-personal life balance now be preserved going forward? What do you think is going to happen?
Yes, this is, I would say, one of the key issues that we see in research of workers' mental health. Whenever there is work-family conflict, that increases all the mental outcomes that I mentioned, such as anxiety, stress, and things like that. So I think it's the openness to talk. So it will come from management and leadership. And I think there will be some push towards including well-being in the conversations that we have at work. And people having the space to say, look, I need things to change a little bit. I need to accommodate this aspect of so I can achieve that work-life balance. Because basically it's a cliche, but a happy employee would be a more satisfied, a more productive one. And I do think if there is one positive out of this, is that companies will start pushing these conversations. Mental health is a taboo still in quite a few places, but I think now we are starting to be more aware that we need to look after people's mental health at work.
Very important point, a very crucial point looking to the future. Thanks very much indeed for that, Katia. If you're just joining us, welcome. This is a Disrupted live event, the first one ever, and it's called Will Work Ever Be the Same Again? That's the question that we're asking still for the next 30 minutes or so. And if you've got a question about the future of work, a burning question that you want to get answered, then do send it in. Just drop it into the comments section just below the video where you're watching, and we'll get back to one of our panelists a bit later on. Thank you very much indeed to all of those that have come in already. Casper, let's go back to you at GAP's tech company in Helsinki in Finland. We just heard Katja there talking about the future of mental health and actually how it's been a bit of a taboo subject, and maybe people are going to be a bit more sort of transparent and a bit more open and a bit more of a listening mood going forward to people's mental health. How important has that been as part of your company, which is embracing this location-free working for a long time now? What are some of the challenges you've had around that?
A really, really important topic, and actually was really discussed in depth last year when the pandemic hit. And we changed our company's healthcare provider to a Finnish company called Heltti, because they embrace kind of proactive mental health approach to, especially to knowledge workers, and it shouldn't be a taboo in any case. It's our most important tool when we are knowledge workers. Our head, how we use it, how well it works, and as you said, Katja, happy workers are more productive workers, and so that's definitely true, and that's something I feel really passionate about.
Okay, thanks very much, Casper. Ben, let me just go back to you at Eurochambers in Brussels. As we talk about mental health, I mean, first of all, do you think it's still a taboo in Europe? Do people feel afraid about talking up about their mental health? And also, do you think this is going to be a risk going forward for companies to take if they're going to embrace these new ways of working in the long term?
It is a risk. I don't think it's as much of a taboo as it has been in the past. So I think that there has been some progress in that respect, but there needs to be much more progress and accelerated progress, because the nature of remote working implies that there is a risk, and as Tim said, we've seen it in our own organisation. The younger people who live in relatively small flats alone are encountering problems with that. It's particularly when they in the periods of the confinement when they really weren't allowed to leave the flat, that was really tough for them. So to be able to handle that, to remain productive in their work while thinking about their family who may be in another part of Europe was a big burden for some of our younger colleagues, and that's been a message that we've heard across the chamber network as well.
And there might be obviously signs that you pick up on in employees when you see them in the office, but if they're working remotely most of the time, they're at home, they might be suffering in silence. So as somebody running a business, that must be quite challenging to be able to spot that and to support that individual, right? Absolutely,
that's a very valid point, and I think it touches on a broader issue about policies to ensure that workers are safe and healthy in general. There's a lot of legislation already in place at European level. We're not suggesting further legislation is necessarily needed, but I think that the policymakers and employers need perhaps to think about the way that that legislation is applied, monitored, and enforced to take into account these different rules. We have a European Working Time Directive, for example, which Casper alluded to. You aren't, your employees are not allowed to work more than a certain number of hours per week. But how do you monitor that in this kind of situation? So these things need to be thought through very carefully in this very different context.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Tim, let's go back to you at Accenture in Heidelberg in Germany. We had a question in through the euronews.com website, which was asking about the impact on relationships within a team. If somebody is getting more flexible working hours than maybe somebody else, and they're having more options in terms of their work, do you think that can affect the dynamics of the team if it kind of seem like that person's getting something else that I can't have?
That's a great question, and I think this is something that we, any organization needs to do considerable work on. So I think there is a need to ensure that there is some degree of parity. If you think about it within the team context, someone who feels that they have to be present versus someone that feels they can be remote may feel that in some way someone is watching them versus the person who's physically there versus the person who's in a more remote environment. And for me, that sort of comes back to that notion of trust. And if you're a good leader, then you're having an active dialogue within the team. You're involving those people wherever they are. And I think you're using that as a flattener. I do think there's probably also kind of a structural aspect to this as well, which is, a number of organizations have actually provided additional benefits during the pandemic so that people could work remotely, whether it's helping them get better furniture, whether it's contributing to their infrastructure, be that physical or sort of network bandwidth and so on. And I think as we move forwards, what we might start to see, and what I hope we see, is some kind of a sort of marketplace for benefits, which again already existed previously, where you can say, I choose to work from home X number of days a week, and therefore I forego the company car because frankly I don't need it. And so what you actually start to do, and again, I think Casper made a good point around this, and also Ben, is you go back, or you go towards this notion of personalization, which is actually what we've been seeing in the broader marketplace, if you look at what's happening in business in general.
Okay, Tim at Accenture, thank you very much indeed for your insights there. Let's go back to Katia Vione, who's at the University of Derby in the UK. Katia, we talked a lot about humans needing to be with humans and parity and equality within a team, having that social contact with each other. If remote working and new ways of working are embraced more in the long term, isn't there a risk that when people apply for a job, they're going to think, okay, if I join this company, I'm going to be stuck at home most of the time. I'm not going to be working with a team. Yeah, maybe I'm not going to apply to that company, because actually, isn't the fabric of a company, the team and the people? Yeah, you have to know what you're doing for your job, of course, but a big part of it is the team, right? And working in a nice place.
Yeah, that is a possibility. At the same time, some people might feel particularly attracted to that because if remote working leads to a better work-life balance, in the sense that, especially if it's flexible, in a way that they know that they might be able to put some hours in as we were discussing before, in the morning, and then later on, and they can attend to their family, for instance. For some people, that mode of work might be preferable. For other people, it's down to individual differences to some extent, but I also think it's also down to organizational culture and values. So it will, if the organization has those set of values and culture that embraces people as part of that work community, regardless of where they are, I think that will not necessarily put people off. And what we know from research within the University of Derby, for instance, is that now during the pandemic, having some specific online activities that are not necessarily related to work or to get something done, but it's just to spend time with each other online, to talk about whatever people feel like talking at that moment, that was perceived as very positive among the teams that were doing these sorts of activities. So I don't think this will necessarily put people off, but it's up to companies and businesses to make sure that each individual will still feel part of that organization.
Okay, Katia, thank you very much indeed. Casper, let's go back to you in Helsinki. When we talk about kind of keeping the team bonded and happy, you can have virtual coffee and cake mornings or beer and wine evenings, whatever you like. But actually, at the end of the day, do they really work? I mean, how do you, putting the pandemic aside for a moment, how do you, as a company that's been doing this way of working for a long time, how do you keep your team bonded?
It's a really good question, and I must say that team bonding is a lot more than just being present in one room and working at the same office. So there's a lot of digital work and communication that goes on to effective teamwork nowadays. And for us, like, examples are that for Fridays before the pandemic, for Fridays we had catering come up to the office and make everybody lunch. So we had our weekly all hands meeting and invited everybody on Fridays, please come to the office. There's free food, usually something good there at the same time.
Winner, right?
So, yeah. So that's one example. And I think in the future, a lot of kind of offsite days for doing that bonding, that face-to-face meetings, and perhaps some workshop things where creativity might be a bit better if you do it on site. Those will be more prevalent, and then rest of the days have the hybrid model that some people will choose to work at the office, an office that has probably changed from the previous location, and it might have changed into a whole different type of office, and then some people are remote, and there you find the personalized balance that works for your company.
And Casper, have you been onboarding any new employees over the past year? Because I know some companies, they've obviously been taking on new staff, and those people have never actually met their colleagues in their life, never met their boss even.
Yeah, we've had quite a few since our Black Friday a bit over a year ago, since we went full remote. So quite a few employees have joined us since then, and indeed, you kind of forget when you've seen those faces so many times in all kinds of video calls and so forth. But a lot of people have said, for some people it works better. They adapt quite well. They are really used to having a lot of chatting and kind of get to know people there. But some have said that, it takes a bit of work, and it's not as easy.
Ben, at Eurochambers in Brussels, how have you been bonding your team over the past year?
Yeah, the recruitment issue has been a real challenge, actually. I'm full of admiration for people who've joined us, and we've had several new colleagues. It must be really peculiar to join an organisation that is fully in remote working mode, but they've done fantastically well. But it's complex, and trying to onboard them is tricky in certain respects, and it's just not as easy to introduce them to the team as, you know, when they come to the office and you do a little tour and take them to show them where the kitchen is, and they just naturally get to meet people. It's happening, but it's not as natural perhaps. But we have to adapt, and the new recruits have done so fantastically.
Ben, if we strip this all back as we look to the future, obviously businesses are in business because they want good productivity, they want to make a good profit, they want their staff to be happy, of course. But where does productivity and profit come into all of this? I mean, some skeptics would obviously say throwing everybody in their homes in the long term is cutting costs. It's a way to the company to kind of keep their shareholders happy, get more money in the bank. Is it about that?
In the long run, there may be advantages. In the short run, we have businesses have, of course, incurred a number of fixed costs in terms of office rent and other ongoing costs, plus having to help their staff adapt to a remote environment if they weren't able to do so immediately. So it's been more expensive, in fact. But in the long term, there may be some cost cutting to be had there, but that's negligible, really, in the grand scheme of things. I think. Our most service providers, their main cost is the human resources, and that will remain. The office costs are a factor, but not a significant one in many cases. Of course, apart from the economic advantages, businesses increasingly have to think of their social and their environmental impact. There's this triple bottom line effect, and that's very much reflected in European policy at the moment, and we have this pursuit of a digital transition and a green transition, and remote working can contribute to that. We have less people commuting. We'll have hopefully a better work-life balance for many people, which has social benefits. Although, as I said before, we can't just assume that. We can't take that for granted. But yeah, we need to make sure that it doesn't impact on productivity. So far, so good in many sectors, but some find it more difficult than others. So policymakers and employers have to work together to make sure that that this is a beneficial scenario for all sectors, in fact.
Okay, Ben, thank you very much indeed in Brussels. If you're just joining us, thank you very much indeed. This is a disrupted live event brought to you by Euronews, and we're asking the big burning question of the day that in fact impacts most of us in the world these days. Will work ever be the same again? We've got about 15 minutes left to run. So if you do have any questions for our panelists, do drop them in the comment section below the video. I've got a few in on Instagram as well, and I'm going to be asking those in the next few minutes. So don't go anywhere. Hopefully I can get round to some of yours. Let's go back to Tim Good at Accenture. He's in Heidelberg in Germany for us this afternoon. Ben was mentioning that important word there, right? Sustainability. It's a big word. It's been talked about for a long time, affects many sectors. Some would say people have been, talking the talk, but not really walking the walk. Has the pandemic and the new ways of working changed all that?
For sure, and I mean, if it hasn't, then it's going to have to change it going forwards. Reflecting on what Ben was saying, and if I can link that into sustainability, we did a big piece of research in Accenture actually last year, which we called Care to Do Better. And the theme of that, and what we found out through that piece of study, is that when you take care of your people across 6 dimensions, and there's a series of dimensions around emotional well-being, mental well-being, physical well-being, and things like, basic financial needs and having portable skills. There was one other block that was very, very important, which was around purpose. And if I think of purpose in its broadest sense, and if I think about that linked to sustainability, then first of all, if you're an organization that's going to try and attract people in the future, and you don't have a purpose and you don't have sustainability as part of that purpose, then you're going to find yourself struggling to get the very best talent very, very quickly. I think the second thing is, quite frankly, as we look to some of the legislation that's rightly going to come in, that's actually going to help us deal with decarbonizing our environment, not literally in the long term, but in the short term, we're going to have to rethink some of these things. And this is going to be one of the areas where we can do that. And we've got to make a link, and we've got to make a link now between that and between ways of working, because this is one of the areas where we can make an impact and make a big impact.
Thank you very much indeed. Casper at GAP's tech company in Helsinki, how much do you and your staff and your company care about sustainability, and how is that reflected in the way that you work, and how is it reflected in the wider sort of startup scene and other companies within Helsinki?
It is very important for us, and it's become in the past few years. It's become a bigger and bigger part of what we do and how we see it. We even actually have a head of sustainability. So hi, Anni. And for us, what it means, one part is that as we're a tech company, we put a lot of value in the sustainability of our technology and the technology that we use, and put the use for our customers. So we work closely with Google, who are really forerunner on sustainable technology with their cloud services. So that's one big part of why we've chosen them as our partner. And I think there's a human factor as well on sustainability, because, as I said, working people to the ground and taking that kind of taking all of that benefit that Ben mentioned that might be there when people are working from their homes rather than fancy, expensive offices, and spending time on commutes that they could convert directly to added work hours. That's not a sustainable way of building a business and building a world. So that's another really important for us as a company.
Okay, Casper. Katja in the UK, do you think people worry about sustainability now when they're finding a job and when they're working for a company?
I would like to highlight one aspect that worries me. So part of my research is around human values, and like protection and caring for the environment might be one of the values that some people consider as a guiding principle and in their lives, and it could potentially be also affecting their work choices, for instance. But overall, sustainability is a big, vague word. And for some people, sustainability might be not using their car. For other people, it might mean never traveling by plane. For other people, it might be just making sure that they recycle. So I think it's a big word, and unless we give some concrete examples of how people can be sustainable at work, so there is the two sides of the responsibility, companies making sure that their processes and what they do is sustainable, but also educating people and employees to say, well, your work is sustainable if or when these are the actions that you take. So that would be my first concern, to make sure that what people consider sustainable behaviors at work is actually kind of guided and fairly equivalent across like the organizations.
Some very important points there. Tim, let's go back to you at Accenture. I'm going to go to a question that we've had on Instagram from somebody called Chilled Minimalist. They're asking, can we make better use of space, I guess office space, that would benefit sustainability? Do you think that could be something going forward?
That's a wonderful question. It's also a wonderful Instagram title. Let me try and be as inspirational in my answer. I think there's two things that spring to mind. So one, I think we in terms of actually thinking within the boundary of the organization, we can think about how we create more collaborative space so that when we're together, we actually have space that's conducive to doing the things that human beings are the best at, and to some of those things that Katya's just so eloquently talked about. I think the other thing that we can do is, quite frankly, organizations, especially like mine, I mean, we have over 500,000 people worldwide. We feel that we have a big duty and kind of a commitment back to the societies we're in. And frankly, we should see what we can do to use some of those spaces. So, there are plenty of times during the, so-called working day when those spaces are actually lying empty when you think about it. There's huge amounts of time over the weekend when those spaces are lying empty. And perhaps what we should be doing is rethinking that and saying, can we bring society into those spaces to make advantage of that footprint when it would otherwise be idle?
Okay, Tim, thank you. Ben at Eurochambers in Brussels, let's go to you with a Instagram question. Somebody is asking here, so will businesses get rid of their office space altogether looking to the future? And what will that mean for things like city centres that are obviously built up around offices? I mean, that's a really important question, isn't it? Because you look after a lot of businesses in Europe. It's not just the new ways of working, it's actually the wider ripple effect in the whole business infrastructure, isn't it?
Yeah, it could have a hugely disruptive impact on the way that cities, urban areas are designed, I believe. I suspect that there won't be many businesses that overnight, after the pandemic is over, shut up their offices and send everybody to work from home, for reasons that we've already discussed about the need for staff to interact, even if it's not as frequently as before. To spend some time together, to have a common area, to be able to collaborate and interact. So I don't think we're going to see ghost towns in our city centres, but nonetheless, there will certainly be potentially changes. We may have companies which share office space much more. We may, as Tim said, find other ways to use a space when it's not being used by staff. But I don't think that we're going to, it's not the end of the office, in my opinion. And of course, there are many other sectors where it's simply impossible to just close the doors and send everybody to work from home. Not all sectors lend themselves to that.
Indeed. Ben, I got another question from Instagram. Sorry to give you a second one. I think it's relevant, though, to you. Somebody's asking here, actually, Cara, thank you very much indeed for your question. Will there be a job? That's the more important question than how work will be in the future, is what they're asking. So there's still a lot of uncertainty about people actually just gripping onto their jobs going forward, isn't there?
Yeah, we are dealing here with a hugely challenging economic crisis. We're in recession. We're going to be trying to get out of that recession for months and months and months to come. Businesses have been hit by a combination of very difficult situations. It's very unlike the economic crisis, the financial market crisis of 2009, 2010. Because it's been a demand side and a supply side crisis, and businesses have got to deal with that legacy from the last 12 or 14 months and try to rebuild their activities. But there is a desperate need for skilled people. So I believe that there will be jobs. I'm optimistic about that. There's been a skills mismatch for years, in fact. So as long as we can make sure that the supply of skills matches the need for skills in the market, there will be work. And I believe that we have plenty of positive elements here in Europe, at least, to rebuild the economy and to provide jobs and employment opportunities for everybody who wants them.
And thank you very much indeed. Let's go back to Tim Good at Accenture, who's in Heidelberg in Germany. Tim, as we look to the future working trends, we've heard this, well, it's kind of well-oiled term now, really, over recent months, the digital nomad. People wanting to not only have the flexibility to work from home, but also maybe to travel a bit and to work overseas in different places, particularly younger people and millennials that don't want to be tied to the same desk or the same city or the same town. Do you think digital nomads will be a reality now? And if so, what does that mean for companies? Because that's a bit of a HR headache, isn't it, in terms of sort of tax and keeping track of people?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, first of all, the reality is that digital nomads are here today. So there are people around the world that are working on projects in one location when the epicenter of the work is maybe somewhere else. That in of itself is not a problem. In fact, it actually links back to what one of my points of departure at the start, which is this sort of democratization of the workforce. We've broken the link between physicality in most cases, not in all, of having to be somewhere and the work being done. You don't have to fly to the head office anymore necessarily to do something. Where I think clearly you have to be careful, and where it's important for the employer and where it's important for the HR organization and the finance organization, is to ensure that they manage that and they deal with that in the right way. I'm not going to get into a discussion here on tax because I'm not allowed to.
No, please.
But clearly there is a tax implication, and it is important that that's tracked by the organization and by the individual so that everyone is protected and things are done properly.
Okay, great. Thank you very much indeed. There was a question on Instagram. What are the implications on taxation? So hopefully that helps you answer that particular question. Thank you very much indeed for sending that in. Let's go back to Katia Vione, psychology lecturer in the UK. Katia, as we wrap up now, we've heard of the talk of the digital nomads, new ways of working, looking forward. Do you think there are going to be opportunities and challenges depending on how old somebody is and their experience? Because maybe younger people, they feel much more confident with digital equipment, working from home, they're open-minded, but maybe older people are a bit less keen to do that. Do you think that's going to be an issue going forward?
I quite like the idea of work without borders. I think that's quite interesting, and it will be appealing for quite a few people. And what you're saying is very much aligned with research. I've done research in the past on values development, and we know that the older we get, the more conservative we get as well. So less open to changes, less willing to experiment too much, and have a slight preference or a big preference in some cases for stability. So it's a bit of like how our values become more conservative with age, and also personality. Some people have a more open to experience personality as well. I don't think it is for everyone. And age, for some people, this interplay of values and personality, for instance, might make it more difficult for older people, or at least they wouldn't necessarily go for those sorts of jobs or that sort of lifestyle.
Okay, Kasia, thank you. Let's go to Casper. Casper, just briefly, because we're running out of time, as we look to the future, are the opportunities more for the younger generation, for the millennials that are perfectly at home with technology and sort of traveling and out there in the middle of nowhere? Or is this something that everybody can embrace going forward? And how much of that is down to the companies to ensure that people are skilled up and confident?
I think it's going to be available for everybody. It should be, at least. Some people will embrace it more than others, regardless of age. I would assume there's going to be some correlation between on the age, but I really hope there won't be. I really hope that this is an opportunity, and there lies also the responsibility for the companies to accommodate that. And that's where I think it's about making technology easy to use and access, and not just kind of leaving it to technology and let people figure it out, but rather really communicate, discuss, and work out what are the ways of working, how we can, as a group of people, as a company, really succeed on this. So I think that's very important.
Okay, great. Casper, thank you very much indeed. Just going to get some final thoughts from each of you. And if you can keep your answers to about 30 seconds, that would be perfect. I'm just going to ask you all the very same question. What's the biggest positive that you're taking forward out of all of the turmoil that we've seen in the past year? Let's go first of all to Ben Butters.
The people are adaptable. People can adapt quickly and effectively and remain productive and happy even in very unusual circumstances. And I think we can build a lot on that and capitalize on that in the future.
Thanks, Ben. Tim Good at Accenture, what's the biggest positive you're taking forward?
The sheer humanity and caring that we've shown for each other. No matter where you look, we've all done that, and we led from that point of departure, and I think it's been inspiring.
And Katia, in the UK, what are you taking forward in terms of the biggest positive for you?
I would say it's resilience. We learned that we can go through a lot and still come after it with some good lessons learned and stronger in some aspects. And the fact that there is now more flexibility and openness to discuss certain topics and care for people's mental health, especially.
Yeah, very important. And Casper, finally to you, what's the positive you're taking forward?
That smart and enjoyable digital work is really a big thing for everybody now.
Okay, Casper, CEO of GAPS tech company in Helsinki in Finland. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Damon.
Ben Butters, the CEO of Eurochambers or Eurochambre in Brussels in Belgium. Thank you very much indeed for chatting to us.
Happy to be here, Damon. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. And also Dr. Katia Vione, who's a psychology lecturer at the University of Derby in the UK. It's been great to have you with us, Katia. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And last but not least, Tim Good, Managing Director of Strategy and Consulting at Accenture, joining us from Germany. Thanks to you as well, Tim.
Thank you very much, Damon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much indeed for all your thoughts and insights. And thank you very much indeed if you've been joining us, if you've been watching this Disrupted live event this afternoon. And thank you very much indeed for all of your questions. I think we could talk for hours, if not days, on this subject because it affects all of us looking forward, the future of work, which has changed so much over the past year. We'll be back with another Disrupted live event next month. But until then, look after yourself, stay safe, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.